I just spent hours writing a script, just hours, and about halfway through I realised that I actually wanted to talk about a totally different book. So the episode I was planning will be for the next time, and this week we'll be travelling back to the not so distant past, because that makes me feel younger, to the days when glamour, wealth and stealthy cat burglars in tight suits and oddly oversized leather jackets were a thing. I spent the entirety of Saturday revisiting an old favourite, because I felt a glimmer of nostalgia. That feeling drifted into Sunday when, for almost 6 hours, I enjoyed watching a clever thief steal the riches of the crooked wealthy, because she could. While 2025 has been the year of the hyped-up fantasy novel, the 1980s were the decade of the sparkling jewels, big hair, even bigger shoulder pads, and novels about all of those things. The 80s marked the start of Jilly Cooper's Rutcher Chronicles, Barbara Taylor Bradford's Emma Hart saga, Shirley Conran's Lace, and the book I'm going to talk about today. This week I am going to be travelling in glitzy circles, wearing shimmering skin-tight dresses, in my dreams, and joining our main character as she goes from seeking vengeance against the men who wronged her to stealing from people who deserve nothing less. Yes, take me back to 1985 with Sidney Sheldon's If Tomorrow Comes. I'm Ray, an unapologetic bookworm, introvert, self-confessed hermit, and long-time depression sufferer. This is my quiet space to share thoughts as I make my way through an ever-growing to-be-read pile that I just keep on adding things to. Join me as I explore stories one book at a time with 100% honest and completely spoiler-free reviews. Welcome to my world, and enjoy your stay. Tracy Whitney was young, beautiful, intelligent, and about to marry into wealth and glamour. She was on top of the world until suddenly, betrayed by her own innocence, she was in prison, framed by a ruthless mafia gang, abandoned by the man she loved. Beaten and broken, but kept going by her dazzling ingenuity, Tracy emerged from her savage ordeal determined to revenge herself on those who had destroyed her life, and to fight back against a society that denied her success and happiness. No one would ever cheat her again. From New Orleans to London and on to Paris, Madrid and Amsterdam, with intelligence and beauty her only weapons, Tracy played for the highest stakes in a deadly game, matching her wits against the successful and the unscrupulous. Only one man can challenge her. He's handsome and persuasive and just as daring. And only one man can stop her, an evil genius who shadows her every move, a man whose only hope of salvation is Tracy's destruction. Normally, right here, I would do an extensive, spoiler-free summation of the book, but I figured that you'd rather hear me talking about the reviews and my personal feelings, so I am going to give you a quick rundown of the story because it is 40 years old, and some elements will be a product of their time, but it's also a book that you may not be familiar with. Having recently read and watched the miniseries, the most obvious things that dated were the clothes and the incredibly bizarre soundtrack. I am going to talk a little bit about the miniseries because, there were some differences and, there were some questionable choices. I will also be talking about the plot in detail, including the characters, their experiences, and some of the underlying themes that I noticed. And I am still going to maintain my no spoilers please, I'm British attitude as much as I can, so I don't ruin anything for you, even though this book is 40 years old. Tracy Whitney once had everything she could possibly desire: a wonderful fiancé in Charles Stanhope III, the son of a multi-millionaire, a baby on the way, and a job she loved. She worked in a bank. All that changes when her mother Doris is deceived by a group of powerful men in New Orleans and takes her own life. Tracy's world collapses. Heartbroken and determined, she returns to her home to discover that the business her mother built up and the home she loved is gone. all thanks to Joe Romano and Anthony Orsatti. Unaware that she is stepping into a trap, Tracy seeks out Romano armed with a gun, and in a struggle, the gun goes off. She went there to get justice for her mother and ends up framed for a crime she didn't commit, that being the theft of a painting, plus the attempted murder of the man responsible for her mother's death. Persuaded to plead guilty by her helpful attorney Perry Pope, she is sentenced to 15 years in jail by Judge Lawrence, completely unaware that they're both in Orsatti's pocket and she has walked right into a trap. But she is sure that Charles will help. She's pregnant with his child and he loves her. Unfortunately, she's wrong. In a phone conversation, he tells her that her baby is her problem and he can't risk having anything to do with her as it will damage his family's reputation. On her first night in prison, she is assaulted by her cellmates, loses her baby, and is stuck in solitary for a week. But she refuses to break. She now has nothing to lose and her desire for revenge burns brighter than ever. Having shown her strength, she has earned a modicum of respect from her cellmates, especially Ernestine Littlechamp, a strong and streetwise inmate. With her help, she learns how to survive and how to plan for the day that she will be free. When that day finally comes, it's not because she escapes, though she does plan for that. It's through an act of compassion. Tracy risks her life to save the warden's daughter Amy from drowning, and her bravery, especially as she can't swim, earns her a pardon. As she walks out of prison, she is no longer the naive young woman she was when she entered. She's determined, cautious, and quietly burning with purpose. She needs that revenge. Freedom brings with it a new mission, that of getting vengeance on those who wronged her. But her retribution isn't cruel. It's precise and clever. One by one, she brings down the men who destroyed her life, not through violence, but through intellect and cunning. Each man, Orsatti, Romano, Pope, and Lawrence, experiences Tracy's vengeance, and with each victory, she is closer to reclaiming who she was before she went to jail. Of course, there is one person that deserves an element of revenge, and that is Charles Stanhope. But we'll get to him. It's after these acts of revenge that Tracy decides to leave New Orleans and get back to her life. Ernestine gives her a name, Conrad Morgan, telling her that he helps women like Tracy to get back on their feet. But she is sure that with her full pardon and her computer skills, her banking experience, she'll be able to get her job back and get her life back on track. On arriving in New York, she discovers that she's very mistaken, but she is reluctant to seek out Morgan until she is accused of theft while working as a hotel cleaner. On visiting Morgan, she discovers he's a jeweler to the rich and famous. He has many clients who are not exactly the nicest people, including a woman called Mrs. Bellamy, who has purchased a considerable number of jewels from him. His plan is for Tracy to break into the house with a key that he has in his possession, use the security codes and the combination to the safe he also strangely has in his possession, and steal a bag of jewels from Mrs. Bellamy's safe, then travel with them by train to St. Louis, where he will pay her $25,000 for the jewels that she has stolen. It's at times like this where we see mentions of $1 million and 250,000 stated as though they are huge amounts of money, which they are to Joe Blogs every day, but they aren't to the wealthy of 2025, that you realize how old the book is. Things go off without too many issues until Tracy is on the train to St. Louis and the FBI shows up, arresting Tracy and taking the jewels. Only they aren't the FBI. They're two con men who've been hired by Conrad to steal the jewels from Tracy so he doesn't have to pay her. Realizing what's going on when she is told by the train conductor that her two brothers have got off the train and have told him that she is ill, that she is being stolen from, she manages to get the jewels back and forces Conrad to pay her double. Pretty smart move there, to be fair. Determined to start again somewhere new this time, Tracy pays for passage to England on the QE2, where she again meets with Jeff Stevens, who was one of Conrad's fake FBI agents. Somehow, though she is absolutely adamant she detests the very air he breathes, he manages to convince her to take part in a clever con, playing chess against two world-class champions simultaneously. And they pull it off. And Jeff does try and do a runner with the money, but she manages to convince him otherwise. In London, Tracy meets Gunther Hartog, a cultured art dealer with an eye for talent and a reputation for navigating the elegant underworld of high-stakes cons, while also being a friend of the aristocracy and spending a lot of time with the nobility. Recognizing Tracy's intelligence and her finesse and her ability to blend in with the kind of circles that he socializes with, Gunther becomes her mentor in enhancing her subtlety and skill, while also offering her both opportunity and protection from the law. With his guidance, she begins to channel her skills into elaborate schemes that are able to blur the line between justice and art. She is a very talented thief, jumping over walls, climbing up the side of buildings, and carefully, without causing much suspicion, managing to steal very expensive goods. As Tracy continues to refine her craft, Jeff Stevens reappears in her life. Their relationship is exceedingly complicated, part competition, part partnership, and eventually something far closer due to circumstances. Together, they stage intricate heists despite being reluctant co-workers, taking from the corrupt and the greedy while maintaining a quiet moral code. Never hurt the innocent. Their chemistry, both intellectual and emotional, becomes the heart of their adventures. But not everyone admires Tracy and her skills. Daniel Cooper, an insurance investigator who first met Tracy when she was accused of stealing a painting from Joe Romano, becomes fixated on her. His pursuit begins as a professional thing, but it soon grows incredibly dark, an unhealthy obsession driven by his own guilt and repression, because he has a secret that haunts him, an event that occurred in his childhood. His mother was murdered by her lover, and the lover was then executed. However, all is not as it seems. To him, Tracy is not just a criminal to be caught, but a personal symbol of temptation and sin. And all the way through the book, he has this very unhealthy fascination with her that becomes very disturbing. His relentless hunt consumes him, leading him into isolation and definite madness. While Tracy and Jeff continue to stay one step ahead, but several times it seems as though they are going to get caught. So, will she get caught? Will she give in to Jeff's seduction? Will they tire of the game? Will either of them find the perfect mark? And what about Daniel Cooper, the creepy investigator? Not going to spoil it all for you, but I am going to be talking about the miniseries and the book and my personal opinion of both of them in a bit. It's that time again. Yes, you knew it would come. The moment where I tell you that I am not talking about any of these books to influence you into reading something that you have no interest in. I know that not every book is for everyone. Sometimes it can be great to step out of your comfort zone, but other times you stay there for really good reason. There are a few genres I'm not particularly fond of reading, including thrillers, and I am always honest about that. I have stepped out of my personal comfort zone a time or two, and it's just further reinforced my view that certain genres are just not for me. So I will occasionally dip my toe in with a new author, but for the most part, I will stay in my lane. It's why I've never talked about Frida McFadden or any of the authors like that on here, and that's purely because I do not read them, though I know that they are the kind of books that many people love. I have to be honest though, my lane is pretty wide, so I don't think it's unfair of me to stay in it. Now I'm going to talk about reviews of other people because I like to ensure that everything stays balanced. So I'm going to be talking about a 1-star review, a 5-star review, and then get to my own feelings about If Tomorrow Comes, because everyone is different. There were a number of 1-star reviews for If Tomorrow Comes. However, the majority of those were DNFs, including this one by Nazrin, who said, I couldn't make it past 90 pages of If Tomorrow Comes, and I have to say this book felt more like a parody than a gripping thriller. The writing is formulaic, filled with predictable twists and melodramatic moments that made it hard to take seriously. Sidney Sheldon's attempt at suspense often falls flat, as the plot seems driven more by convenient coincidences than by any real sense of danger or intrigue. The protagonist, Tracy Whitney, is supposed to be a sharp, sophisticated woman, but instead she comes off as naive and reckless, hardly the cunning con artist she's meant to be. Her decisions often feel forced, and I found it difficult to believe that someone with her background could make such elementary mistakes. The character development is weak, and the dialogue feels overly contrived, adding to the sense that the entire narrative is a series of cliches strung together. Despite the book's popularity and high ratings, I couldn't understand the appeal. It lacks the emotional depth or meaningful storytelling that make a book truly memorable. If you're looking for a thoughtful, well-crafted thriller with compelling characters and an intricate plot, If Tomorrow Comes may leave you disappointed. This one was a definite DNF for me. I absolutely love reading reviews once I've finished a book. While many newer books seem to attract so many that it can be overwhelming, look at the 1 million plus for books like A Court of Thorns and Roses and Fourth Wing. Others, especially older novels like this one, seem to struggle to get into the 3-digit space. The reviews for some can provide hours of entertainment, and others just require hours of research when trying to find the balanced perspectives I like to provide. Interestingly, at least for me, the majority of 1-star reviews for If Tomorrow Comes were from readers who did not finish the book. There were a small number written by people who took issue with a specific scene that takes place in the prison. It's rather brutal, to be fair, with one complaining about the lack of trigger warnings. Being honest, and I am being completely honest, I always am, trigger warnings I skip. I've never found them to be something I'm concerned about. I know the book is fiction, and despite having experienced several things that could be considered trigger warning worthy, books remain my happy space. I know they're not real, therefore they're not going to hurt me. On Goodreads, the overall rating for If Tomorrow Comes is 4.07, and on Storygraph it's 3.94. To be honest, I am a little surprised at that. Not because I'd rate it higher, but because it's an older book, much older than any of these platforms. And past experience has shown that reviews for these tend to be less frequent. I would love it if this review, my review, encouraged more people to pick the book up. But it's down to you if you are interested in finding out more about Tracy and Jeff and Conrad and Gunther and everybody else. If Tomorrow Comes was first published in January 1985. My copy is actually a 1986 reprint with the original cover in bright teal and green. And in March 1986, a 3-part miniseries of the book was released, with Tom Berenger and Madeline Smith cast in the roles of Jeff and Tracy, and David Keith as Daniel Cooper, their creepy investigator stalker. It had all the glitz and glamour of the book. However, having recently watched it, I 100% prefer the book. If Tomorrow Comes has 70,247 ratings and 2,872 full reviews on Goodreads. I had to wait to write that because Goodreads was down when I started this episode. And on Storygraph, the book has a total of 2,481 reviews. Sometimes the ratio of ratings and reviews on Goodreads surprises me. I honestly didn't expect this book to have quite as many ratings as it does, though I do wish it had more reviews. But we can't have everything we want, as my current job hunt is proving. Gurpreet Dhariwal's Goodreads review for this book immediately caught my eye because she said what I imagine a lot thought when looking at this book on the shelf next to other authors who wrote strong female characters in the 1980s. She gave the book 5 stars and said, "Okay, before I start narrating the story of this book, I must confess that a major part of my life was spent claiming Sidney Sheldon was female. It was then, when I picked this book, The Other Side of Me, that I realised he wasn't a female. Pardon me, Mr. Sheldon. Coming back to this stunning book, it's a story of resilience, strength, courage, and an upbeat spirit and a never-die attitude. It takes you back to the streets of the US in the 1980s, where people were busy committing crimes and setting up traps for other innocent beings. On the page. The story will keep you glued throughout to the last page because it's about a woman who gets to face stuff as she becomes the prey of the mafia, and later she transforms herself from that victim to a con artist. And trust me, she does some enthralling things while being a con artist, which makes men tremble and wonder about her whereabouts. I didn't want to swallow this whole poison instantly, so I divided the novel into 50 pages to taste its venomous flow every day. Pick this up if you're a fan of reading crime fiction, just the way Mario Puzo did with The Godfather and The Last Don." Right, now that I have mentioned what others are saying, here's what I really think about If Tomorrow Comes by Sidney Sheldon. No spoilers, just 100% honest. It's really difficult, being honest, to be unbiased when it comes to this book and many of the others that I read during my tween and teen years. However, it is possible for me to see their faults. While I do love the feelings that the story evokes in me, nostalgia, and strangely a warm childhood hug. Yeah, I know that sounds weird. Despite some of the more questionable plot points, the book is far from perfect. There are plot holes all over the place. Admittedly, watching the TV miniseries, which I will be mentioning here because the contrasts have to be brought up, right after reading the book, not only did that help me to see the problems, but also some of the clever plot devices that Sheldon used when creating the story and his characters. Though obviously not of the same class as her fiancé Charles, Tracy grew up with money and the advantages that can provide. Her father built up a successful business that her mother continued to run. Tracy acknowledges that while her childhood was not disadvantaged, they would never have mixed with people like Charles's parents, the Stanhopes, their oil and water, and his parents make it clear from the outset that they don't approve and believe Tracy to have trapped their son with a baby, though it's far more explicitly stated in the series than it is in the book. In the book, we see a little more of Tracy's life before her mother's untimely end. We see her meeting Charles's parents, and what an awful pair of snobs they are, and the couple talks about their hopes for the future. To me, this better establishes the life that Tracy loses, in a way more so than the evidence of wealth and overconsumption that we see in the series. Also, there is a very strange Tai Chi routine Tracy does in flowing robes with the wind blowing through open windows that fills up a good few minutes of the opening series part 1. And that sounded really weird, but you'll see what I mean. Tracy's mother ending her life in the way she does is the trigger that sets everything in motion. However, her desire for revenge, Tracy's, is also an opportunistic moment for the men who already saw to it that Doris Whitney lost everything. I do wish that we got a better idea of A, the business her mother once owned, and B, the motive behind Orsatti and Romano ruining it and targeting Doris Whitney in the first place. I mean, was she someone who gambled or something that they immediately thought, oh, she's a great patsy? Or was it just opportunistic? Tracy's desire to get revenge for her mother's death leads to ruination. And though I feel intense sorrow that it happens the way it does, she appears so naive at this moment. She was warned that Romano was someone she shouldn't mess with by multiple people, but she walks into his office seemingly oblivious to the danger she's placing herself in and is surprised when it all goes very wrong. And it goes wrong in such a way. In the TV series, it takes mere seconds. In the book, it's a few pages, and there is an attempted assault, and her gun goes off. These are very powerful men. She knows they're powerful, yet she still thinks that she has a chance of winning against them. For me, this was not so much a sign of naivety as it was sheer stupidity and stubbornness. Did I think she deserved the fate that she was handed? Not at all. But she didn't exactly help herself. Charles, however, was an absolute arse. I love that when Tracy has the chance to have her revenge on him in the book, she knows that he's already living it, married to the woman his parents approved of, miserable and growing quietly and quickly old and bored in her company. However, the scene where he tells her that the baby she's carrying is her baby and it's her choice what to do with it is an incredibly insensitive moment. She's asking him for help, clinging to the hope that he will save her because of their love and the baby, and he tells her he wants nothing to do with her. For some reason, though you can see her tears in the scene they completely rewrote for the miniseries, this was so much more agonizing. In the TV series, she had already lost the baby when she speaks with Charles, and he's dismissive and tells her that maybe it's better this way because there are no ties between them any longer. At that point, she's already lost everything worth something to her, and this is just the door slamming shut. They also make him look miserable and mournful at saying these things to her, while in the book they're dismissive and heartless, giving him no chance of redemption. There's something so glamorous about the book. Yeah, I know sometimes it's not quite so pleasant and some of the things are horrible. And once you get past the brutality of the events in prison, and they are truly brutal on the page, far more so than in the series, because with a few words you can evoke so much more than you can with a single scene shot on film. The things you can imagine as the character is crying for help hit home that much harder. I can see why someone asked why there weren't trigger warnings, but this is an 80s book, not a 2020s book. Trigger warnings did not exist on film, on the page, or in audio. What takes over 2 hours on screen takes less than 100 pages in the novel, and it's when Tracy is finally released that the action starts to happen. Though I have to talk about her time in prison here because there's a huge disconnect between the prison scenes on the page and on screen. On screen, we see her as a warm person who immediately warms to the young girl whose near-death experience triggers her release. On the page, the bond with Amy is much slower to build, with her staying detached, cold almost, something which makes sense given her recent experience. The risk she takes in warming to a young child, having so violently lost her baby, is one that could do damage to her mentally. Staying distant is protection. On screen, she is immediately warm, smiling, playing with young Amy, and quickly attached. This felt unnatural and unrealistic, a disconnect given everything she had gone through. Of course, that's not the most important bit. Once she's on the outside, she has one thing on her mind, despite Ernestine trying to persuade her otherwise. Her revenge on the men who put her in prison is sophisticated and elegant. She doesn't waste her time with a gun or accusations. She sets about systematically destroying them where they live. And I loved it. The TV series has the revenge happening incredibly quickly and all at once. In fact, it takes place in 3 short scenes. In the book, we learn about the plans, the carefully plotted steps, and the culmination is assumed, making it seem all the more sinister, especially where Orsatti and Romano are concerned. At this moment, Tracy went up in my estimation because she finally learned that confrontation was not the way to go with men who were used to wielding all the power. She adapts, and I really appreciate that. Her revenge is calculated, clever, and uses the men's distrust of each other against them. On screen, it was far too tidy, too easy. I'm not sure why, but having achieved her revenge, Tracy's behaviour reverts. She goes from on the ball, realistic and sensible, to I will be able to go back to my old life in New York. Yes, she had a full pardon, but that doesn't mean everyone will believe her innocent of the crimes she was accused of. And this is something that she quickly discovers. Who in their right mind would trust her with their money at a bank? She is unable to step back into the life she once had, and after a succession of bad jobs, she finally realises this. That it took her this long is astounding, though. It's actually rather frustrating that her innocence is portrayed this way, almost as though innocent and stupid are interchangeable. You can be innocent without believing the sky is pink, but that's exactly what it feels like when Tracy returns to New York and expects things to be able to go back to the way they were. Not with Charles, obviously, but with her job and her life. Now we're back in New York, though, we have to talk about Charles again. While she was in prison, all Tracy could think about was getting revenge, and though he was not responsible for the mess she was in, to be honest, she was quite responsible and she needs to accept that. He didn't help her when he could. As I've already mentioned, in the book, she sees him in a restaurant and upon seeing how miserable he looks with his wife, she knows that this is its own revenge. In the series, however, we get a full-on confrontation. She sees him with his fiancée and his judgy parents and lets them all have it in the middle of a restaurant, all guns blazing, telling him that this is the perfect revenge as she knows he's going to be miserable. It was amusing, of course, but it really felt like something from Dynasty, which shouldn't have been included. But I guess you can't read a character's thoughts on screen, so they had to do something to make it translate better onto, so people didn't have to just assume. Unable to get a proper job in the city, Tracy is forced to get one with a crook, a jeweler called Conrad Morgan, who steals from his clients. And this is the first time we truly see her using her wits since New Orleans, and the first time she meets Jess Stevens. In the TV series, she meets him at the very beginning, and there are connections all the way through. That doesn't happen in the book. From the moment Jeff's introduced, you hate his name. I don't know why, I've never liked the name Jeffrey, but the game he plays is an interesting one, and I loved the way that Jeff and Tracy played off each other. A real case of enemies to lovers if ever you saw one, because she hates the very air he breathes and will do anything to get one up on him, no matter the game. Jeff has played some sophisticated cons, and he's clearly intrigued by Tracy, though she wants nothing to do with him, which probably makes him chase her all the harder. Steal from her once, and it will not be happening again. Until it does. She may have the brains to plan a great heist, but she is still far too trusting when it comes to offers of help. I have to be honest, she gets what's coming to her as far as Jeff's concerned, because she doesn't stop and think. She's so blinded by the fact that she expects him to take from her that she actually forgets to keep an eye out for it happening. And I am not sure how that works at all. It just does. As I've mentioned Jeff, I have to mention the creepiest person on the pages of the book, and also on screen, who is actually strangely more sinister in the TV show. Daniel Cooper. First introduced when Tracy is sent to jail, he's an insurance investigator who becomes fascinated with Tracy upon her release. He's obsessed with her to the point of insanity, following her, spying on her, believing her responsible for every single sophisticated theft that has been carried out since she was released from jail. He has a bit of a dark past, which you get snippets of throughout the book, starting with the unveiling of a newspaper clipping he keeps on him at all times. The story of a young boy who got his mother's killer convicted and executed. As the story develops, the book, and you see more of Daniel, you discover that the young boy was him, and then things take an even more sinister turn. In the TV series, Daniel is far creepier than he is on the page, if only because of the music that accompanies his every single scene. It's kind of this weird, broken music box, children's music box, you know, the little ballerina, and it's slow and really weird, and it just sort of sets images in your mind that you really don't want. And the repeated flashbacks reveal more of his story as the episodes go along. He believes Tracy to be his saviour, his absolution. If he can catch and convict her, then he will be forgiven his sins. He has fantasies of Tracy in the bath. He steals her underwear and breaks into her hotel rooms to smell her clothes when she's not there, searching through her belongings. It's distasteful. Being honest, his relentless pursuit of Tracy is terrifying, exacerbated by the way that he is so tormented by his past that he becomes obsessed with his belief she is guilty of every theft everywhere. Even the people he works with find him unpalatable, calling him, referring to him as an ugly person and someone they don't want to spend time with. There's a scene in the TV, in one of the episodes, where he is at Interpol with a very young Liam Neeson putting on an awful French accent, and he cuts his hand on the letter opener, and he seems to take pleasure in examining the wound, so much so that the person who's with him and offered to help him with that wound leaves feeling very uncomfortable. Despite the trauma of his past, there isn't one moment where I feel an iota of pity for Daniel and what he went through, and being honest, I'm very glad of that fact. So, is Tracy a good person? She is stealing from the rich and giving to who exactly? The poor? Is she a Robin Hood? By the end of the novel, she is not poor herself. She has made hundreds of thousands, if not millions, from her various heists. She can live a comfortable life, and still she chooses to continue until she finds happiness with Jeff, of all people. Tracy and Jeff are morally grey. Their victims aren't the nicest, but insurance companies will increase the premiums of the innocent to fund the huge payouts they have to make. The little people will pay the price at some point. Does that make them bad? Good? Somewhere in the middle? Tracy, Jeff, and many of their co-conspirators straddle the line of justice and revenge, and it's an intriguing place to be and definitely makes for an interesting story. If they were 100% good, there wouldn't be a novel. If they were 100% bad, you wouldn't be rooting for them to succeed in stealing a Goya or an uncut diamond or that stunning necklace sitting unseen in a safe. Despite feeling as though the novel has a cast of thousands, most of the characters serve their purpose and are discarded like yesterday's newspaper. After New Orleans and prison, there's no mention of Amy or Ernestine. The only characters who are with us to the end are Tracy's mentor Gunter, Jeff, Tracy, and Daniel. That being said, the TV series gives us a little more, with scenes in London showing Tracy buying dolls for Amy and a fur coat for Ernestine. And being honest, those little touches were appreciated. It showed the characters weren't forgotten. I'm honestly frustrated that the ending of the novel is so ambiguous. And it really is. If you read it, you'll sit there going, what? It feels as though Sheldon always intended to write a sequel but never got around to it, though I'm not sure why. If Tomorrow Comes is, though, part of a trilogy. The final 2 books were written by Tilly Bagshaw. However, reviews seem to infer that the tone and stories are very different, which sort of puts me off. There's something about Sheldon's writing of these characters that I personally like. All in all, I did enjoy If Tomorrow Comes, and I'm glad that when I did a massive unhaul back in 2008, and it was a massive unhaul, I had cupboards full of books and I gave so many away, I actually got very upset, but I was downsizing and I had no choice. I'm glad this was a book that I decided to keep on my shelf because I had a wonderful time revisiting after all these years. Sometimes keeping books unread for decades is a great thing because reading them after all that time is like spending a holiday with good friends. As ever, take this review with a pinch of salt. These are my personal views pulled together with a little bit of analysis of the characters and the situations they found themselves in, but it is personal. Of course, if you enjoyed If Tomorrow Comes, or you want to read something similar, you're not quite sure if this is for you, then try one of these. Strangely enough, my school library shelves were full of books by authors like Sidney Sheldon, Virginia Andrews, and Danielle Steele. So from a very young age, as I've already said, I was reading novels like If Tomorrow Comes, Flowers in the Attic, and Message from Nam. If you're looking to revisit books from the 1980s, or maybe visit them for the first time, here are a few that I think you would enjoy, and they are a few that I really need to reread for myself, because it's been at least 15 years, if not longer. Princess Daisy, I'll Take Manhattan, Mistral, and Scruples by Judith Krantz. All of these are sweeping sagas, multiple generations of wealthy families, the scandals, betrayals, love, and lies, all told through the lens of 1980s fashion, music, and glamour. Then you've got Lace 2, Savages, and Crimson by Shirley Conran. Yes, she was married to Jasper Conran at one point. Lace probably produced one of the most famous quotes in a 1980s miniseries ever, stated by Phoebe Cates as she confronts a group of women who could all potentially have been her mother. Now, if you look that up, you will know I'm not going to say it because I do not swear on this show. Sidney Sheldon, of course, I have to talk about Sidney Sheldon. He got his start writing for film and TV and even won an Oscar. Television audiences loved his work on shows like Heart to Heart and I Dream of Jeannie, and he didn't actually start writing novels until he turned 50. So there's hope for me yet. So if you enjoyed If Tomorrow Comes, then perhaps his other novels will be a good option for you, including The Other Side of Midnight, Master of the Game, and Rage of Angels. Unfortunately, since my last episode, the whole job situation hasn't changed. However, I am still interviewing and keeping my fingers firmly crossed that one of the companies I'm speaking with sees me as the right fit. I had hoped that this would mean I would read a lot more, but I have been taking it a little slower on the books and have only just finished book 7 of the month. Of course, I have also just picked out my 10 before the end. Pretty picture has been posted on my Instagram, which I will link below if you want to check it out and see what I've picked. I have honestly found myself longing to revisit favourite books of the 1980s, but I only have a few left on the shelves from that time, as unhauling was so much easier when I had to do it in order to downsize. Having a large library space now gives me reason to keep everything I purchase or have been gifted. All of that having been said, it is now time for my shorter review. And this week I am actually looking at the third book in a rather popular fantasy series, mostly made popular by the shorts on TikTok. Accomplice to the Villain by Hannah Nicole Maehrer. Word to the wise here, though, if you haven't read the first 2, do not start with this one. And if you haven't read the first 2 in a while, definitely give yourself a bit of a refresher. I have greatly enjoyed the story of Evie Sage and Tristan, the villain. However, I did find myself feeling just a little bit lost when I picked this one up. While the action in the previous book in the series, Apprentice to the Villain, was exciting, I did struggle a little bit to recall smaller details that played a much bigger part in this story. Things have moved on for Evie and Tristan since he started to acknowledge he had feelings for her, but he blows hot and cold so often, leaving our heroine feeling perplexed. She is doing her best to flirt with him, to show him that she's interested, and he's pushing her away because he's been told that he will be her undoing. Why couldn't he just tell her this? Seriously, I really do not know. Miscommunication drives me nuts. The whole hot and cold, will they, won't they, actually gets a little bit tiresome, especially when you know that they are constantly thinking about each other and their interest is clear, at least everybody that's not them. Kingsley is as charming, enchanting, and amusing as ever. I love the fact that he's 100% shipping Evie and Tristan, finally becoming a couple and acknowledging their feelings. He jumps in at the right moments, providing a bit of levity with his small signs and his facial expressions, though obviously being a frog, these are sort of limited. I really enjoyed the build-up to the conclusion and the conclusion itself, but I did quite often find myself wishing that I had read the first 2 books again before reading this. Yes, I am going to repeat that, and I know I said it at the beginning of this review, because it is one of the key things which reduced my enjoyment of certain parts of the story. I enjoyed reading about Gideon and his awkward relationship with Keeley, but found Lyssa to be annoying, and the whole story with Noura, again, likely due to not having recently read Apprentice, felt a little bit out of place, and I did feel as though I was walking into the middle of a conversation I had not previously been part of. All in all, Accomplice to the Villain was a bit of a fun ride, but do reread the others first, or at least give yourself a bit of a refresher so you understand who is who and what is actually happening for more than half the time. I am looking forward to reading what I believe will be the final installment in the series, Adversary to the Villain. It will be good to see if the conclusion I think is currently being set up will actually be the one we, as readers, get. Well, that's it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. If you're enjoying the show, why not share it with friends or family, and please leave a star rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen, because those reviews and star ratings really do help. You can find me on Instagram at beingbookishpod, on X at being_bookish, and on TikTok at beingbookishreviews. Prefer reading? Head to beingbookish.co.uk for spoiler-free reviews, my 2025 reading tracker, and all the links to my podcast episodes on multiple platforms and my social media links in one place. Until next time, this is me saying farewell.